welcome to episode 44 of Top of Mind with Consilio. Hao and I are back. And there's a bunch of things in the news that we'd like to discuss today. And we also like to address a question that's been coming up a lot in our planning meetings with our clients. That'll be our first topic today, which is it's gifting season. At least seems to be on a lot of people's minds. So we thought we would address some stuff with that. And number two, Google's Gemini problem. Oh man, we all saw this in the news. We thought we'd unpack that for you all. Number three, who's the biggest mouth in AI? Is it Sam Altman or is it Elon Musk? There's an ongoing lawsuit between the two, sort of debating on the best way to take OpenAI, or what was said was going to happen there and what should happen, and they're kind of battling that out. Next item is the stock market expensive? Does it feel expensive to you? Just hit an all-time high about a month ago. Short answer is yes. Long answer is, does it matter? Probably not, but maybe. We'll know in the future, and we'll unpack that. And finally, Trump slams Meta, and it drops 5%. All right. Hao, welcome back. How are you today?
Good. It's March 11th, almost close, so almost 1 o'clock Pacific time here.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Let's talk quickly about gifting stuff. You know, this has come up in a handful of meetings recently. I don't know if it's because people are doing or prepping their tax returns, or they're just getting all their stuff from last year and they're kind of checking the annual boxes. I thought I'd just take a minute here and discuss some gifting strategies and gifting kind of best practices. The most common thing that we run into is funding 529 plans. And funding 529 plans is one way to gift to your kids or your grandkids, your great-grandkids. You can also give them cash outright, or stock for that matter, but just assets outright. And there's really two limits to pay attention to. There's the annual gift exemption limit, and that limit in 2024 is $18,000. That's a per person limit. So myself and my wife, we can both give $18,000 away to anybody. So that'll total $36,000 that we can give tax-free. It's free to them, free to us to give, no deductions or anything. But that amount does not go against what's called our lifetime exemption. If we wanted to give more money, like $100,000, for example, then the 36 would go on a gift tax-free basis, and the remainder we'd have to file a gift tax return, and it would go against our lifetime exemption amount. That number is currently really, really big. It's $13.61 million per person. That number doesn't come up as often in our discussions. It does move around from time to time with IRS tax code changes. But if you give more than $18,000 or $36,000, if you're doing what's called gift splitting with your spouse, that amount goes against your lifetime exemption. Okay, back to 529s. So 529s have a special rule. You can give $18,000 into a 529. If you're married, filing jointly, you can give 36, and you can give up to 5 years of that all in one single year. So if you're single, you can put 18 times 5 into a 529 plan, 90 grand. If you're married, you can double that, assuming your spouse agrees to gift splitting, and so you can get $180,000 into a 529 all in one shot. When you do all this, you do have to file what's called a Form 709. In fact, anytime you give more than $18,000, anytime that you elect gift splitting with a spouse, you have to file this Form 709. And Form 709 is really just a paper trail to the IRS that says, here's what I did, here's when I did it, and here's who I did it with. And I think that's important because should you ever be audited for how much is in this account many years from today, you would have to point back to this form that you filed in, say, 2024. You said, here, I did it appropriately on my tax return. How many questions on that? I know I kind of flew through that. What makes sense? What didn't make
broadly,
sense?
Why is planning the estate so important? I know what happens if you get over that 13.61 million, which, a lot of people are thinking, I'll never get to that amount, but, if you're saving and things kind of grow or compound, you'd be shocked how many projections that we see are worth more than the estate limit. Why is this why is it so important when it feels so far away for a lot of people,
Yeah,
even if
definitely.
they're really wealthy?
Yeah, well, and the amount changes. And so 13.61 million times 2 if you married is a big number, but that amount bounces around every number of years as tax changes happen. It could
Yeah.
go down to $1 million exemption for each person. It for one period of time was unlimited, so you could give any amount of money or die with any amount of money, and there was no estate tax. So why this number is important is the amount above that is then subject to the federal estate tax amounts.
Right.
And so that can be an expensive way to leave money to, say, your heirs. I think the point is if you're above those numbers, you certainly need a good estate plan. But even if you live in Washington State, for example, and we have a personal exemption here of about 2.25 million times 2 if you're married, you need a proper estate plan to be able to plan around these things so that you're giving the right amount of money into the trust to utilize your exemption correctly, and then most tax efficiently pass money down to your next generation. So I think in sum, what I would say is know the federal limit and know that it does move around, but know your state limit more importantly. Also, life insurance is included in your state. If you personally own the policy, if you have a group policy through, say, Microsoft, if you pass away, that death benefit is added to the value of everything else that you own. So life insurance plus all of your current assets, most everyone is over at least the Washington state limits, and therefore they need an estate plan that allows them to utilize the proper trust planning and whatnot at death.
So in a different way, is that reducing the estate balance on paper just to minimize the impact of the tax statewide and then federally?
Yep.
Right.
You got it. Trying to utilize the exemptions to the fullest extent. And this is also where this gifting stuff comes in on an annual basis. If it's projected you're going to have well over these limits, leave a lot of money to your kids, grandkids, or whoever's important to you. If you're charitable inclined, it might be wise to start giving before you pass away. And there are many reasons why people would do that. I could also cover why people maybe wouldn't. But why would you cover that is you can see those people start to benefit from your inheritance early. I think a lot of people get a lot of personal enjoyment from giving, say, that 18 or 36,000 and watching that younger person use that money and enjoy some of their inheritance before you're gone. Again, what we focus on mostly is 529 planning. That's just the most common sort of thing that clients are going through. But certainly there's a lot higher level of giving and planning that can be happening within estates.
And do you happen to know the federal tax rate for any amounts exceeding the 13.6?
40%.
40.
40. Yeah, it's high.
40.
Washington State also has a very high estate tax limit. I would just encourage people to Google that. It's a bracket depending on your estate value, and then above a certain amount, it's all taxed. But Washington State is a very expensive state to die in. Again, everybody needs proper planning if you're in Washington State in order to make sure that you're utilizing your exemptions correctly.
And that includes the house, right? Because I know $1 million house is pretty common in today's dollars. Imagine what it's like in 20 years. So that includes like the value of the home, right?
Includes the net value of the home. So if you have $1 million house and you owe $500,000 on it, it would be a $500,000 value of your estate.
Okay, so that can tally up pretty quickly, the limit.
With a house, with life insurance proceeds, and with a couple of accounts and a handful of years of work, it's very easy to get over the Washington state limits. It's harder to get over the federal limits, but again, those federal limits change a lot. Again, just Google that if you're curious. I mean, they change every handful of years, and they're, of course, hard to predict. They are very, very high right now. So I think if they were to change, they likely come down. That could be wrong, but they generally are lower than they are now.
Good to know. Yeah, I think with proper planning, hopefully you can reduce some of those impacts, though.
Totally. And I think our point here is that, seems to be gifting season. So just know those rules of what you can give to anybody, and you can gift split. So again, 18 grand is the annual limit this year. It was 17,000 last year. times 2 if you're married, so you can give 36. If it's a 529 plan that you just opened up, you could go all the way up to 5 years of that times 2, so 180 grand if your spouse agrees to gift split. So that's a super powerful tool to utilize. You talk about that federal estate tax limit. That's a very good way for, say, grandparents to move $180,000 per grandkid out of their estate quickly. That's a very good way to reduce the estate size. If somebody has enough money to be able to justify to do that, that's a commonly used strategy as well.
So reduce the estate size and therefore reduce the potential tax liability on both the state and federal side. So I think
Bingo.
that's important. Okay.
Because that exemption doesn't go against the lifetime exemption, which is that 13.61 number. So I can give 180 grand to my grandkids. I don't have grandkids, but I can give 180 grand to my grandkids in a 529 plan, assuming my spouse consents, right? It's 90 apiece. And I still can use that 13.61 when I die.
Got it. Okay.
So that's powerful. So yeah, know the rules. Form 709, you got to file. Your CPA does this for you. And if you're curious, we actually just produced a couple of blog posts on this. If you go to our consiliowealth.com, under Insights, if you go to Consilio blog, there's 2 that I would encourage you to check out. One is Gift Splitting Explained. We posted that on January 5th. If you're subscribers to us, you probably got that in your inbox as well. The other one is Simplified Form 709 Instructions. If you're curious on how to do that, we've got a blog post on that too.
Good stuff.
All right, cool. Let's move on. Google's Gemini problem. Man, this is a little bit of a mess. So I want to let you kick us off here. What's your take? First of all, what happened?
Yeah.
For those that don't know, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, Google is publicly released Gemini, which is essentially the competitor for ChatGPT. So it's generative AI in terms of words, and more recently images, and then even more recently no images, right? So Gemini was able to use prompts or command prompts to generate an AI generated image, right? So if you said, hey, I want a picture of a dog in the park, right? You type in the prompt and out comes this AI generated image, which is, unique to you. I think that's a cool technology, and it shows you the power of AI generated tasks, right? At least in this respect. So Gemini had to be pulled because some of the images were historically inaccurate. So, and again, we might touch on sensitive prompts here, but these users weren't trying to break Gemini. They were just saying, hey, I would like to see an image of a 1943 German soldier. In other words, a Nazi. The image generator produced images of an Asian woman in Nazi uniform, a black guy in Nazi uniform, and a Native American woman providing medical services in a Nazi uniform. Obviously, if you know your history, those people of color were not Nazis. So I think that's a huge issue. And again, it's a pretty common prompt, right? So if you're doing research on World War II and you wanted to generate images, you would think World War II was the U.S. and other countries against Nazis. And I think when you're portraying Nazis as, anyone but white men, I think that's a historical inaccuracy, and I think that's the biggest issue with Gemini and why they pulled it so quickly, right? It was only available for a few days, and it didn't take much to essentially break it.
So first of all, why did they test for that? Because, this is the internet, right? So things are going to go into the prompt and
yeah.
strange things are going to come out. But that's besides the point. So was the program, did it generate these images based on how they programmed, or did they manipulate the results and try to filter the result for the query, and then ultimately it went wrong? Like they said, do this or don't do that. Like what do we know what happened that yielded this? because it's horribly inaccurate. First of all,
It is.
right?
Yeah, yeah. I think Google, well, it is. I don't think Google's SVP, Prabhakar Raghavan, SVP for the Gemini image creator, came out and said, "Hey, we set up, predetermined guardrails essentially, where we don't want Google or Gemini to generate inappropriate images or content that could be deemed, violent, sexual, or whatever Google thinks is wrong, right?" One of the prompts was to increase the level of diversity in its outputs. So, just completely well-intentioned, but it generated responses like this, right? So then the unintended consequence is, historical inaccuracies, just wrong information, and images that don't really line up with history.
God, that's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy, right? Because if generating more diverse images is one thing, but then forgetting about the time period is another.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that shows you how hard it is to program something like that ahead of time, right? Because I totally get where they're coming from, because they don't want the wild, wild west of AI generation, right? Because you could get pretty bad, right? So if I were to prompt the engine to say, hey, show me a picture of Russell Wilson kicking a puppy, who's getting sued in that scenario, right? I use Russell Wilson because of the Seattle ties, but who's getting sued there? Is it me? Is it Gemini, or is it ChatGPT, whoever generated the picture? Right? Or how do you pre-program that to disallow a prompt like that is obviously using Russell Wilson's image and likeness, doing a heinous act like kicking a puppy, right? So, one, do you not allow the AI to generate a current figure, let alone a historic figure, to be so accurate that you think that it is Russell Wilson really kicking a puppy? If I were to post it in my LinkedIn, right? Is that allowable? That's one philosophical question. But the second one is, where does the liability land, right? I put in the prompt, but there's a tool that enabled me to generate that prompt. Now all of a sudden Russell Wilson can sue me, and or Microsoft or Google, and you could see where the lines get really blurry really fast.
Or if he has to now have a budget with his annual spend on defending himself, like, nah, it wasn't me. It wasn't me.
AI generated, right?
Right. Blaming AI for generating non-accurate images of yourself.
And I use the celebrity example, but what if you're a private citizen who has libelous content that, one of your neighbors generated for you, and they send it to the HOA because, Howard doesn't put away his trash. I generated, a picture of my neighbor not, properly putting the trash away, and send it to the HOA. All of a sudden, I'm getting a fine. And even then, how do you pre-program for that or moderate for that? Because one, I just came off the top of my head, but if someone were working at Google, well, what about those neighbor disputes? Well, how do you even draw the line there? Because one, we want to make it useful, but if we overcorrect, we get what Gemini gets. And
and
it's still to this day not even released.
Totally, and I think so what's coming to mind for me is like the push to release something is big, right? Every big company needs a solution for this. Well, they might be releasing a little bit early, but think about how good Google search is. Like the whole point of Google search is when you plug in a random phrase into the search bar, it yields you an accurate result, not an inaccurate result, an accurate result. And Google tracks, the bounce rate, right? If you click on something and it doesn't yield you the right result, and then you hit your back button and you click on something else, Google knows that, and they know the relevancy of what they're serving you in terms of the links. I'm sure that didn't happen overnight. Like, it's so good today, and when you go into another search engine and it's just not good, Google trained their systems and their algorithms and however they built this thing in many, many, many years and billions of clicks. I wonder if AI just needs more training in this space, like this image generation, video generation type space, so that it can produce a more accurate result over time.
Yeah, and I think they were trying, because they know imagery can be sensitive, right? So that's why they wanted to get ahead of it. We saw a little taste of it with, Elon Musk's Twitter. He started breaking down all these standards, right? Then all of a sudden we saw inappropriate content next to a Disney ad or next to a Ford ad. Do those big corporations want to be associated with, let's say Nazi propaganda? Well, no, right?
No.
You would expect some level of moderation. And I think Google, that's what I mean by being well-attentioned ahead of time. They were trying to get an appropriate level of content that wasn't offensive. But sometimes things are just offensive because, they were, right? Like a shooting at a mall or a movie theater. You're going to see offensive imagery. Or let's say if I wanted to prompt a operating room for just a heart surgery, you're going to see blood in that image, right?
Yeah.
So how do I scale blood out in one scenario and leave blood in another scenario? How do you program for that?
I mean, Meta with their products, they have the little button that says this is sensitive, and you have to tap it in order to see whatever the thing is on the news. That's a sensitive thing. So possibly that could be, a quick solution to that.
Possibly, yeah. And I think we're bringing this up because I think we're seeing quite a bit of demand for psychology and philosophy majors from these tech companies, which is kind of like out of left field, but we set up a pretty good scenario for the need for this type of expertise, right? So my friend, who is a philosophy major, I thought he was going to be unemployed for the rest of his life, is in crazy high demand, not just from Google and Microsoft, but from Intel, EA Games, and Expedia, for very specific examples. They all use some form of predefined rule sets that they need to know if they're appropriate or not, right? So I'd imagine EA Games was, because they do what's called loot boxes. You buy a game, and then suddenly you're asked to buy more in-game. So if you want a new armor, you got to pay more. I'm like, well, I paid $70 for the game. Why am I paying you more? And they're always pushing that line of what's acceptable or not. But they have to ask that question before people actually buy their product or use their product, right? Before it gets, in an uncontrolled scenario where everyone's trying to break it or pull up inappropriate information from it.
Wasn't Tesla the first one to start hiring a bunch of philosophy majors because of the
autopilot?
For self-driving cars, because you have to figure out, if this car's gonna crash, and there's a puppy and there's a kid, and there's an 80-year-old, who you're gonna run into. You have to make a choice, and that's, I suppose, you need a philosophy major to figure that out. That's deep. That's big.
So if your kid tells you they want to study philosophy, I probably wouldn't push too hard, because I think they will be in demand going forward. And I don't think it has to be AI that utilizes their services or expertise.
Okay, so what's going on with this lawsuit between Sam Altman and Elon?
Yeah, I think two of tech's favorite people right now.
Totally.
They're both very bravado. They're both very loud and very public personalities. So they were friends, I guess, back in 2015, and suddenly they're not friends. So Elon Musk is suing Sam Altman and OpenAI for kind of going back on their mission, which is to provide free AI, open source AI, which is why they call themselves Open AI. Musk took a little dig at him and told them to change their name to Closed AI. But OpenAI doesn't really make money if it's open source, because there's a big investment from Microsoft, and they're monetizing ChatGPT, right? So the lawsuit probably doesn't have a lot to stand on, but I think it opens up a lot of the catchphrases the tech world, at least the leaders of the tech world, have been saying over and over again, we could replace all the AI content with crypto, and it'll still have the same message, right? So I'm just going to read some of these phrases. A nonprofit company to save the world from a dystopian future, right? That's OpenAI.
Bitcoin does the same thing.
Yeah, does the same thing, right? At least what the people who are trying to make money off of Bitcoin are saying.
I think WeWork does the same thing too.
WeWork, Robin probably. I'm sure Robin had said something like that. Benefit humanity, help humanity. AI is on par with human cognitive ability, which poses perhaps the greatest existential threat we face today. Right? You replace the term AI with crypto, with electric cars. You have the same beats with all these phrases, and not saying that AI is all hype, but they're coming from the same factory, at least from what the sales factory that we've all seen before over and over again.
Yeah, it's marketing, right?
Yeah.
So we touch on this in our blog. We have a blog out there called "What If AI Is a Dud?" And I'll encourage everybody to take a read to it. I do want to say that this is not a so what we focused on here was mostly what if it can't be monetized in the way that's hoped.
Yeah.
And what if a ridiculously large amount of money goes into building these out, and then the marketplace for it isn't as large as anticipated? That's what we mean by dud. We're not here to be naysaying on AI, period. But how I want you to expand on that, because you've got some good stories here. I know you wrote this article.
Yeah, well, let's be clear. If it's right, I wrote the article. If it's completely wrong, we wrote the article, me and Chris.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Just put that down for the record. So I think what we've seen with Altman and with what Musk have been saying in terms of this catchphrases, we're seeing similar patterns of behavior, which I don't know if you remember, Chris, the Long Island iced tea company changed its name to Long Blockchain Corporation, and then the stock popped like 200%. And they still sold Long Island iced teas. They didn't have anything to do with crypto. All they did was change their name. That's an extreme example of overhype, risk-on behavior that we haven't quite seen with AI yet, but that's something we would watch out for if you're in a bubble, right? Because completely unrelated companies are simply just changing their name to cash in. I think that's the first red flag. And again, to get to that point, a lot of risk-on behavior had to occur, right? It didn't happen overnight. Like blockchain had been really popular for quite a few years, and then this tea company started just changed their name to cash in. Overinflated valuations, I think, is another byproduct of this, where yes, we're seeing Nvidia, we're seeing Microsoft, not Google. Google's getting punished for the Gemini drop, but we're seeing elevated expectations for something that hadn't been monetized yet or hadn't been widely adopted yet. So if AI becomes a dud, meaning all this infrastructure that's built for AI processing is all for naught because, society or the demand shifted to another product, it most likely will be technology driven, right? So I think Nvidia might be still fine, but you would look at these companies that have tied their fortunes to a single technology, right? And that I think that's a bit of a boom or bust mentality, but that's why we kind of want to focus on the people who sell the picks and shovels, so to speak, right? Like the gold rush was such a big deal, right? But the people who made money were like Levi Strauss, because they sold jeans to miners, and this guy Brannon, who bought all the axes before the rush actually came, and then he resold. Yes, so exactly two people made money off the gold rush. And I think that's what something that you would have to look for is who's supplying this rush rather than trying to find out who the winner is, because ChatGPT and Gemini are the biggest profile AI, but there's a whole cottage industry of AI offerings right now. You could find find the whole list. Yeah, there's so many AI applications. There's no way to pick a winner out of the field right now.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that too is at what point is the use case not usable anymore? Meaning we're seeing videos are getting built. I actually just saw this OpenAI post on Instagram, and it was a video of a car driving around. It was imagine a car commercial.
Yeah.
And then it would just give it a prompt, now make it snow. Now make the car red. Now make it in Western terms. And, it was like a horse instead of a car. Now make the car futuristic and make it fly. So they kept pushing these terms in, and it would recreate the video in the same exact way, but change it based on the prompt. And that's cool, but what's the use for that? I mean, I suppose the use is I can now do that in seconds instead of do it all in, I don't know, Adobe products for maybe hours. But really, what's the use for that? Are movies going to be done differently? Are actors all out of a job? Are singers all out of a job? Is no one going to be on screen anymore because it's all going to be, AI people? Maybe, plausible. But then ultimately, can we come back to sort of square one or the roots, which is, can we make people more productive? Can we do more with less? Can we grow companies further with less human capital because each person is doing the same as 3 people or 10 people or 70 people? I mean, I think that's really what fundamentally it's trying to do. And if we can get, writing styles trained, emails answered and that kind of thing, that's cool. My question is, at what point does it become unusable? It's cool, but not usable in the real world.
Yeah, because who would use image generation at this point other than people who publish and sell images to make some kind of money off of newspapers, magazines? Guess who's against AI mostly right now? Newspapers and magazines, right?
Yeah.
So I don't see again, my kids picked up with their own money the new, not the new Oculus, but the Oculus Quest 2. They played it for, I could count on my hand how many times they've played before it started collecting dust. Mm-hmm. So
now you play
it. Yeah. No, I play it. One, you get pretty dizzy, but that's beside the fact. It's just, is it a fad where you pick it up for a few hours and then put it down? Because really, how much productivity are you getting, at least in this current form? I could be totally wrong with what I'm seeing now, where it just evolves like the internet has, which I think that's what the promise of it is. But right now, it just seems like, well, I'm going to play with it for a few hours and then put it down. It just doesn't really, you know what I mean, add anything yet.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, and it's interesting. You're one of the people that it makes dizzy. There's, I can't remember the number, but it's 30% of people, 60% of people, something. It's a big percentage. People that report that using the device makes them dizzy. So it's again, I don't know if it's most, but it's certainly a lot. It's not 4%. It's a lot of percent of people that it makes dizzy. Yeah.
Well, what I found it was good for, and I didn't film this, is my son ran into the wall because that was where the AI led him. And it was one of the funniest moments of my life, and I didn't film it. But I think it's good for meme videos of, I'm sure people have seen plenty of people run into walls with VRs because they don't know their boundaries.
Yeah. That could fall over and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So the unintended use case. So there might be something behind it. I don't know. It might end up being a meme for all I know.
Yeah. Okay. So is all this making the stock market expensive?
Yes. By far, right? Well, not by far. The market just really got expensive in 2023, relatively speaking. So what we're really saying about expensive is the price to earnings ratio. How is that done historically, right? So going back to 1994, the price to earnings ratio averaged about 16.63 times earnings, which means For every dollar of profit I'm getting from the S&P 500, I'm paying 16 times on average over the last 30 years. On the low end, going back to 2009, I paid 9 times for every dollar of profit. So that's the low end. The very, very high end, which was in the dot-com boom, which is about 25 times for every dollar of profit. Right now, we're at $20.52 or 52 times for every dollar, which historically is more expensive. It is. I don't know how else to sugarcoat that or say anything different. But, if your standard is to invest when the market's cheap, good luck. I think if that was your standard, you would have been invested about 33% of the time over the last 30 years, because you would have bought cheap, but then you would have sold when you thought the market was expensive. Does that make sense?
What's cheap mean?
Cheap means if it falls below the average PE ratio of 16.63%.
Okay.
So believe it or not, the market's, it's an average, but the market spends a lot of time above that average.
So it only spends what percent of time below that average?
33%.
Wow. It's not very much.
No, because the market's always making new highs, right? Like,
It's
always expanding.
Well, we talk about that.
Yeah.
50% of the time, it's within 5% of the high.
Exactly.
So it's generally going the right direction.
So if you were invested in only 10 years of the last 30 years, you didn't make any money. Your performance was pretty middling. But if you had even higher standards where you didn't want to invest unless the market was really cheap, which is like 13 times earnings, you would have been invested only 13% of the time. So the whole, get greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy doesn't really stand there, because over the last 30 years, you would have been only invested in 10 of those years if your standards were relatively loose, or even worse than that. And 13% of 30 years is, 4 years. Imagine being only invested 4 years of the last 30 years. Yes, you would have missed
in cash for 30 years.
Yeah.
Which we're not recommending.
Yeah. To be fair, you would have missed the dot-com boom, you would have missed COVID, you would have missed the great financial crisis, but you still would have been.
You would have missed a lot of "I told you so" moments. Yeah. But you would have missed a lot of return. Yeah. A
lot of returns. But to be fair, those "I told you so" moments aren't as common as people think, but that's psychology, right? People think the worst always happens, and they tend to give more weight to those bad events than the good events, right? Because if you're down $10, it feels worse than when you're up $10. But, scientifically speaking, you should be feeling the same, but that doesn't that doesn't apply to a lot of people.
That's crazy. I'm just so shocked that the market really doesn't spend much time in the cheap zone. It's like kind of always expensive. It's always average to expensive. So I think that's your point is, even though it's expensive, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't invest. The market is generally expensive. It's making new highs. It's always going to feel that way. And if you wait until it's cheap, you're going to be buying in 4 out of 30 years. You're never going to get a good return doing that.
Yeah. And if you're the type of person who wants to wait till it's cheap, and if it does get cheap, like in 2009, what are you going to say 99% of the time? It's only going to get worse
during that time.
Yeah,
it's only going to get worse.
And then you have no buy low opportunity because the market rebounded. And I think that's a classic of example of waiting for things to get better before you invest. But then when they do, your excuse is suddenly, well, the market's too expensive. I'm not gonna buy an expensive market.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to our last topic. We just have a couple minutes left here. So Trump slams Meta, and the stock drops 5%. What happened? I didn't even see this in the news.
Yeah, he was asked about banning TikTok, and he said, no, I want to keep TikTok around, because if we ban TikTok, it's just going to empower Meta more. And subsequently, the Meta stock dropped by 5%. And again, that's why timestamps are always valuable, because when we talk about stock prices are going to move. But yeah, the initial market reaction seems to be overdone because, one, it's a presidential candidate. And two, I think we've established that presidents don't move markets. So
yeah, not really.
The movement might be coincidental. Meta's had a really awesome run. So this simply could be profit taking, or let's just humor the market for a little bit and assume this was related to the comment. One, do you want to ultimately invest like that? I would say no, right? Because that's a little too reactive.
I would say no.
And two, do you think a company that just touched its multi-year highs is bound to pull back a little bit? Maybe that's just a natural, movement of the markets. I want to. This is only going to get worse. This is only March, and it's going to go on through November, at least until the election, where you're going to hear so much rhetoric, and there might be certain prices that move. We do not recommend jumping into the fray or jumping out of the fray if you see that. Because presidents don't move markets. I don't know how many times we're going to have to say this, but I think today's just an example of a candidate saying, for probably a lot of personal reasons, because they booted him off the platform, why he has a bone to pick with them.
Yeah. Yep. This is just the first of a lot of these this year. So, And as you said, it doesn't tend to matter at the end, which we know to be true, and we'll keep posting that here.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in today, and we will catch you again in 2 weeks.